Family disowned me. You never brought anything good to this family, Dad said. Too bad they didn't know about my secret business I started 2 years ago. The memory of that day still haunts me, like a ghost that refuses to leave the corridors of my mind. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the worn-out living room furniture that had seen better days. The air was thick with tension, heavier than the humid summer heat pressing against the cracked window panes. My father's voice, sharp and cutting like shattered glass, echoed through the small house we'd called home for 23 years. You never brought anything good to this family, he declared, his words landing like physical blows. Each syllable carried the weight of years of disappointment, misunderstanding, and unmet expectations. I stood there, frozen in place, as my mother silently twisted her wedding ring, unable to meet my eyes. My younger brother, Alex, stared at his shoes, while my sister, Emily, bit her lip so hard I thought it might bleed. The rest of their words blurred together, something about how I'd wasted opportunities, how I'd failed to secure a stable job, how I'd become an embarrassment to the family name. The accusations swirled around me like a tornado, sucking away the oxygen, making it impossible to breathe, let alone defend myself. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that while they saw only the surface, judging me by appearances, I had been building something extraordinary beneath their very noses. For 2 years, I had been nurturing a secret life, cultivating dreams that sprouted in the quiet hours when everyone else slept. By day, I was the disappointment they claimed to see. But by night, I transformed into someone else entirely, a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, a creator of possibilities that would have made them choke on their harsh words if they'd only known. As I packed my few belongings later that night, folding clothes into a battered suitcase while tears streamed down my face, I kept replaying my father's words in my head. How could he not see? How could none of them see the truth lurking just beneath the surface? The irony was almost too much to bear. They were throwing me out for being a failure, while in reality, I was closer to success than any of them could imagine. The business I'd built from nothing, the connections I'd forged, the lives I'd touched through my work, all of it existed in a parallel world they refused to acknowledge. The decision to keep my entrepreneurial venture hidden had seemed wise at first. In our small town, where tradition weighed heavily on every household, deviating from the expected path was practically heresy. My parents had always envisioned a conventional life for me: college, a steady 9-to-5 job, marriage, children. When I graduated with a degree in marketing instead of following the family tradition of teaching, they'd already begun to worry. But when I turned down a perfectly respectable position at a local firm to pursue what they called risky ventures, their concern turned to outright disapproval. Every time I tried to explain my vision, they dismissed it as impractical dreaming. Building an online platform for independent artists? That's not a real job, my father would scoff during family dinners. Why can't you be more like your cousin Sarah? She got herself a nice accounting position. The truth was, my business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Over the past 2 years, I'd created a digital marketplace that connected emerging artists with buyers worldwide. My nights were spent negotiating contracts, developing marketing strategies, and troubleshooting technical issues. During weekends, when they thought I was wasting time browsing the internet, I was actually closing deals worth thousands of dollars. The secrecy became both my shield and my prison. On one hand, it protected my fragile dream from the crushing weight of their doubt. On the other, it isolated me, creating a chasm between who I really was and who they believed me to be. I'd become an expert at compartmentalizing my life, the dutiful daughter who showed up for Sunday dinners versus the driven entrepreneur who worked through the night. The stress of maintaining this double life was exhausting, but I convinced myself it was necessary. After all, how could I explain to people who equated success with stability that my unconventional path was actually working? Looking back, I realized the secrecy had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more I hid, the more suspicious they became. My late-night activities, which were actually crucial business meetings with international clients, were interpreted as irresponsible behavior. The extra income one earned, carefully deposited into a separate account to avoid questions, was mistaken for financial instability. Even my growing network of professional contacts was viewed with suspicion. Another strange phone call? My mother would ask, her tone laced with disapproval. The walls I'd built to protect my dream had inadvertently reinforced their negative perceptions. Now, standing in the doorway of the only home I'd ever known, suitcase in hand, I understood that the greatest tragedy wasn't being disowned. It was that they would never know the truth about the person they had condemned. They would never see the hundreds of artists whose careers I'd helped launch, the struggling creatives who found hope through my platform, or the global community I'd built from scratch. Their rejection wasn't just personal, it was a dismissal of everything I'd worked so hard to achieve, everything I'd sacrificed to build. The journey that led to this moment began 2 years ago, in a tiny rented studio apartment above Mr. Peterson's bakery. The scent of fresh bread wafting through the floorboards became my constant companion as I pored over business plans late into the night. Those early days were filled with equal parts excitement and terror, the kind that makes your hands shake as you hit publish on your first website, knowing you're putting yourself out there for the world to judge. I remember sitting cross-legged on my futon, laptop balanced precariously on my knees, watching the site analytics tick upward with each passing hour. The first sale came 3 days later, a young photographer from Portland buying ad space to showcase her nature portraits. I danced around that tiny apartment until dawn, the thrill of validation coursing through my veins. As the months passed, the business grew in ways I could never have anticipated. What started as a simple platform for local artists expanded into a global network connecting creators with collectors from Tokyo to Berlin. The challenges came fast and furious, navigating international payment systems, dealing with copyright issues, managing server crashes during high-traffic periods. There were nights when I wanted to give up, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. Like the time our entire database crashed right before a major art fair, or when a prominent artist threatened legal action over miscommunication. Each obstacle taught me something new, forced me to grow in ways I hadn't imagined possible. But it wasn't just about overcoming technical hurdles or business challenges. The most rewarding aspects were the human connections I forged along the way. I'll never forget receiving an email from Maria, a single mother in Spain who used our platform to sell her paintings and support her children after losing her job. Or the elderly sculptor from Italy who, through tears, thanked me for giving him a chance to share his life's work with the world when traditional galleries had turned him away. These stories became my fuel, my motivation to keep pushing forward even when things seemed impossible. Yet, with each success, the gap between my two lives widened. During family gatherings, I'd sit quietly while they discussed stable jobs and real careers, my heart pounding with the knowledge of what I was actually accomplishing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, running a business that generated more monthly revenue than most of their combined incomes, yet I couldn't share a word about it. The platform had grown to include mentoring programs for young artists, partnerships with arts organizations worldwide, and even a scholarship fund for underprivileged creatives. All while they thought I was aimlessly drifting through life. The emotional toll of this duality manifested in unexpected ways. I developed migraines from the constant stress of maintaining two identities. Sleep became elusive, my mind racing with thoughts of both worlds colliding. I started taking different routes home from official errands, terrified of running into family friends who might ask probing questions. The joy of my achievements was often tempered by the loneliness of having no one to share them with. Success, it turned out, felt hollow without understanding witnesses. There were moments when I considered coming clean, especially during those family arguments where their accusations cut deepest. Why can't you be responsible like your peers? They demand, completely unaware that I was currently negotiating a 6-figure partnership deal. The temptation to reveal everything, to watch their faces transform from disappointment to shock, was almost overwhelming. But something held me back, perhaps fear of their disbelief, or maybe the realization that their approval should no longer dictate my self-worth. Instead, I channeled that frustration into my work, using their doubt as fuel to prove them wrong in my own silent way. The true cost of keeping my business a secret became apparent in the relationships I cherished most. My best friend Rachel, whom I'd known since childhood, began pulling away as she struggled to reconcile the person she thought she knew with the increasingly distant version of me she encountered. "You're always tired," she observed one afternoon as we sat in our favorite coffee shop. "Always looking over your shoulder like you're waiting for someone to catch you doing something wrong." Her words stung because they were true, and I hated myself for letting this lie affect even my closest relationships. Our weekly coffee dates dwindled to monthly, then to occasional texts, as I found myself canceling plans to handle midnight conference calls with European partners. At work events and industry conferences, I mastered the art of deflecting personal questions. Fellow entrepreneurs would ask about my background, my support system, how I managed to balance such rapid growth with personal life. I learned to craft vague responses that satisfied curiosity without revealing too much. The loneliness of these interactions was palpable, surrounded by people who shared my passion, yet unable to fully connect with them. Networking events became exercises in careful choreography, avoiding topics that might lead back to family or roots. I watched colleagues introduce their proud parents at award ceremonies while I maintained my practiced smile, knowing that my own family wouldn't even recognize my achievements if they saw them splashed across headlines. The isolation extended beyond social circles into my daily routine. Simple pleasures became logistical puzzles. Celebrating a major business milestone meant finding excuses to stay out late. Accepting an industry award required elaborate cover stories about workshops and conferences. Even ordering office supplies had to be done through third-party vendors to avoid deliveries arriving when family members might be present. My apartment became a fortress of secrets, with encrypted files and burner phones carefully hidden away. The freedom that entrepreneurship was supposed to bring felt instead like a gilded cage, beautiful but confining. Perhaps the most painful aspect was the way my secret distorted my sense of self. The constant vigilance required to maintain the facade began eroding my confidence. I found myself questioning whether their judgment was somehow valid, whether I truly was the failure they claimed. The voice in my head that whispered imposter grew louder with each successful quarter, each new market entered, each life changed through my platform. Success should have silenced those doubts, but instead it amplified them, making me wonder if I was somehow unworthy of my own accomplishments. Even as I built bridges for others through my business, I found myself standing alone on the shore, watching connections form around me while remaining trapped by the chains of my own creation. The platform I designed to empower artists ironically mirrored my own predicament, helping others find their voices while mine remained muffled by circumstance and fear. Yet, despite the isolation, despite the ache of separation from those I loved, I continued forward. Perhaps because deep down, I knew that some truths couldn't be contained forever. Some lights shine too brightly to remain hidden, regardless of how tightly we try to hold them in check. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening, 2 weeks after I'd been forced to leave home. I was sitting in my office, a small but efficient space I'd rented under a pseudonym, when the phone buzzed with an urgent message from Rachel. "Your dad had a heart attack," it read. "He's stable, but you need to come." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The weight of everything, the secrets, the rejection, the years of building walls, crashed down on me like a tidal wave. My hands trembled as I grabbed my coat, the irony not lost on me that I was rushing to the same hospital where I'd once negotiated a partnership deal with their medical arts program. The drive passed in a blur of rain-slicked streets and flashing headlights, each mile bringing me closer to a confrontation I'd both feared and secretly hoped for. When I arrived at the hospital waiting room, I found my family huddled together, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, my brother's arm protectively around Emily's shoulders. They looked up as I entered, shock registering on their faces before quickly morphing into something else. Shame perhaps, or maybe just the weight of old wounds reopening. "Emma," my mother whispered, standing up hesitantly. The others followed suit, their movements uncertain, like they weren't sure whether to embrace me or keep their distance. But before anyone could speak, a nurse emerged from the ICU corridor. "Mr. Thompson is asking for his daughter," she announced, her voice gentle but firm. Everyone turned to look at me, confusion rippling through the room. "I'm Emma," I said quietly, stepping forward. The nurse nodded and gestured for me to follow her. As I walked down the sterile hallway, memories flooded back, every harsh word, every dismissive glance, every slammed door. But beneath all of that, there was something else, love. No matter how broken our relationship had become, no matter how much pain we'd inflicted on one another, this was still my father. And despite everything, he had asked for me. When I entered the room, he looked smaller than I remembered, his face pale against the stark white sheets. His eyes fluttered open as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "You came." It wasn't gratitude or apology, it was simply acknowledgement, a crack in the armor we'd both worn for so long. "I did," I replied, pulling up a chair beside him. We sat in silence for a while, the hum of monitors filling the space between us. Finally, I took a deep breath and began to speak. Not about anger or hurt, but about the life I'd built, the artists I'd helped, the dreams I'd nurtured, the impact I'd made. I told him about the platform, the partnerships, the lives changed because of my work. I didn't do it to prove anything, I did it because he deserved to know who I really was. At first, he listened silently, his expression unreadable. But then slowly, tears welled up in his eyes. I didn't understand, he admitted, his voice trembling. All these years, I thought you were lost. That you'd given up. He reached out, his hand weak but steady as it grasped mine. I was wrong, Emma. So wrong. By the time my siblings and mother joined us later that evening, the atmosphere had shifted. There was still tension, still unspoken words lingering in the air, but there was also hope, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could begin to rebuild what had been broken. Over the next few days, I shared more of my world with them, showing them the platform, introducing them to some of the artists I worked with, explaining how my business operated. To my surprise, they were fascinated, not just by the success itself, but by the passion and purpose behind it. It wasn't easy. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and trust takes time to rebuild. But slowly, piece by piece, we started mending our fractured relationships. My father especially became one of my biggest supporters, encouraging me to pursue even bigger goals and helping bridge the gap between traditional values and modern ambition within our family. In the end, being disowned wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about understanding. Where I discovered that success isn't measured by external validation, but by the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind. And most importantly, where I realized that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by the people who choose to stand by you, even when it's hard. As I stood outside the hospital weeks later, watching my family laugh together again for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was, and that was enough.